War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review. I'm Jacob Szymanski. Rami Amwithan is with me as always. Rams, what's your interpretation of this quote?
Oh, man. There's too much to say, and I feel like we really got into it last week as well. Around
It's very
just,
context sensitive,
I
to be
know.
fair.
Yeah, definitely. But essentially it sounds like propaganda.
Oh, it's as propagandy as it gets.
As it gets. Yes,
I
exactly.
mean, it's one of these things where if you say it often enough, it becomes true.
Yeah,
Or at
just
least
drink the
it's
Kool-Aid
the
and
goal.
just trust.
Just drink the Kool-Aid,
trust
yeah.
it.
But yeah, so if you weren't aware, last week we reviewed Audible's awesome dramatized adaptation of George Orwell's 1984. If you haven't heard that review, the short version is that we loved it for its great performances, tight writing, original music, and outstanding production value. Today, we're lucky enough to have the writer of this adaptation with us for the next 30 or so minutes. Joe White is an award-winning writer of screen, stage, and audio. He's the writer of the hit West End musical The Little Big Things, and is also the writer for another popular Audible audio drama, The Knox, amongst many other things. Joe, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
First things first, when you hear all the big names that are attached to this project, Andrew Garfield and Andrew Scott, a couple good Andrews, as well as having music that's been recorded at Abbey Road Studios with the London Metropolitan Orchestra, you can tell that there's a budget behind this. How did this project come about, and when did you get involved?
It felt, in the first instance, I just got a message from Robin Morgan Bentley at Audible, who's the commissioning editor there, who just said, hey, do you like 1984? And this was last February, I think. And I just read it for the first time the summer before. I didn't do it at school like a lot of my peers and people, my age did. But I loved it and immediately was thinking about how I'd, do an adaptation for anything, film or TV or audio. And so I said, I absolutely love it. What's the plan? And they were like, well, we need a first draft by in 2 months. So if you could do that, then let's start talking. And I was like, aha. But I did it. I sort of got into it. I read it 3 times through and just sort of then had to put it down and just start. And but sort of never dreamed of, getting the cast that we've got and an amazing soundtrack by Matt Bellamy and Ilanish Kiri, and as you said, recorded in Studio One, where the Beatles recorded, where so many amazing soundtracks have been recorded. It's just, it's insane. And I don't know, I've sort of taken it. It felt like I've been in this sort of, I've connected a lot with Winston Smith, caught in this sort of mad machine that has just been going and going since, and finding myself sort of alienated at points, and then sort of like a part of something at other points. It's been a sort of wild experience, but it's been thrilling, and I'm so happy about the way it's been received, and very proud of it.
And you said, it's wild that it got as big as it did. But to me, it feels on the contrary. I think that doing any kind of adaptation of something that's already so well known, so talked about, means, and then the production value and how big Audible is, it couldn't have been something small. There's no way.
Yeah, maybe I'm probably being modest. I probably mean liked rather than than sort of the size of it. I'm surprised that it hasn't just been sort of unanimously hated, because it's such a seminal and loved piece of work. That was a big, that's a big fear factor in adaptation. You've got to. I read something once that good adaptation is repetition without replication. The thing exists in itself and will always be there. And hopefully this leads a lot of people and a whole new audience to the original book. But you've got to, there's something subjective about adaptation always. So it's always going to be through the sort of prism, the conduit of me.
Well,
And then that becomes there's a scary focus on the points at which you choose to, focus on, and the points you leave out.
and how did you go about making those decisions for 1984? Like, what were the specific elements, the themes that you especially wanted to keep in, and how did you decide what to extract?
So I come from a theatre background primarily, and a lot of what I was thinking about early on was always about speech and the way that these people interact with each other. Before I was even really thinking about thought and Winston's internal voice, shifting the third person narrative of the novel into first person, with via Winston. It was all about how people talk to each other, and even though it's sort of a heightened world where everybody's being watched, so the things they talk about can be quite exclamatory, I guess, and expositional. I still wanted it to sound real, and so a lot of things like geopolitics and the ideas of the Brotherhood and Goldstein and the Revolution and things like that were sort of less interest to me in terms of what people were talking about day to day. The key things for me to think about were the love story with Julia. As surprising as it is, actually, that Julia loves Winston. It's sort of, there's no way around it. It's a kind of surprising point it's a surprising point in the novel. It's sort of a surprising point.
Right,
in the
that was my observation.
Yeah, it is, and trying to find little points in the adaptation to sort of hint at Julia seeing a kindred spirit in Winston, and thinking about the way in which Winston hears O'Brien's voice in his own head, and feels some sort of connection with him. I was like, well, maybe Julia's had the same thing. Maybe Julia's seen this guy who's clearly rattled, terrible at hiding it, is walking around sort of anxiously, the way in which he converses with people, the way in which he works, everything sort of hints at a thought criminal. And I think she sees it immediately and goes, that's someone like me. There's someone who doesn't fit in this world. That's sort of just going off scraps, really. Orwell writes a lot in this book. There's a sort of distance from the third person narrator of the book. It's the way in which he looks at society, but also his connection with Winston's connection with women. There's it's not a disdain, but it's not, it doesn't feel romantic or connected in any way. So Winston's previous wife, his life with his wife, who he hasn't seen for years, is violent in the book. It's really, and he has visions. He has these really violent visions of the things he wants to do to Julia. And I was like, I find this really hard to connect with this character. So those are things that we sort of, I left out. But if you have the scariest thing for me reading it was, I think that the thought of breaking somebody down so that they can say whatever you want them to say when they're not in their right mind through torture is a horrifying thing in itself. But the thought of stopping somebody loving someone else, and getting somehow to the root, something in the heart of somebody that's hidden away, that is really protected. That felt like that had the biggest stakes to me in this world. And Winston has purposefully not cared about somebody for a very long time because he doesn't want them to take something away from him. He's remained on his own for so long, and as a protection, I think he knows exactly what's going to happen. Everything that happens in this story, I think, is inevitable in Winston's head, and it plays out in a sort of horrifying way.
Yeah.
But he can't help himself falling in love and all the selfish things that come with that, in that sort of
But even then, he kind of refused, right? It was her who met him where he was. I think it was episode 4 where we get that really long depth of conversation between them, trying to understand, where it's going to go from here. Is there a bigger purpose? Is she going to, you know, step into the chaos with him, or is he going to drop her, the love that he's experienced with her, to find the brotherhood? And I think in that, it very cleanly portrays exactly what you're talking about, his protection of himself and him really not wanting to allow her in.
Yeah, it was some of, everything comes from the source material, but I'm really proud of that scene in Hate Week where they have the fight about what they're doing and what they want from their life, and Julia presents the opportunity to run away. Let's go and get menial jobs in a factory somewhere in the parole quarters, and we'll be okay if we have each other. And Winston's adamant it's not enough, that they can't exist just for their own sort of selfish love in the context of all of this. That if he can plant a seed of something for somebody else, then that's enough. He can die knowing he's done something. And yeah, that sort of the I guess the conflict in that scene, and having to see a sort of change in Julia, or at least see what Julia is willing to do for her love of Winston, is it's sort of meaty dramatically, but it's sort of horrible because she could have got away. They could have both got away, but she could have definitely got away there, and maybe survived for a bit longer. But it's it's the sort of horrifying inevitability of it all. Really, I think there's some. I personally, when I read it for the first time 2 years ago, it's almost as soon as you pick it up, that they're doomed. I didn't know anything about it, but as soon as you open the page. So it's just about how far we're willing to go on that sort of journey. It's a difficult and like sort of horrifying journey to take people on, but I think there's so much. I remember I was listening to your last podcast, and you were talking about like it's such a book of thematics that there are stakes built into the relationships, like Winston and Julia, but it's got these huge pillars about sort of sort of big thematic debates, and what it is, why are we here, and why do we construct society in the way that we do, that sort of rises to the forefront. But yeah, in dramatizing, it's so crucial to focus on the human stuff, and for me anyway, and that we had when you're doing an audio drama, you get access to an intimacy with the listener that you don't necessarily get when you're watching something. It's you're physically sometimes in people's heads.
You are, yeah,
and that's such an exciting thing to play with, to have a very present voice that's very close to the listener. It's very intimate and it's immersed, and it feels like a confidant of sorts. And then but you're also witness. You're witness to the world, but you're also witness to the sort of external forces and other voices that are trying to get into that space. So when O'Brien's voice comes into Winston's head, or Julia's voice comes into Winston's head, and he shares it with not only those characters, but us too. Our space is invaded as well. There was something really exciting about that from the off. And no spoilers, but I always knew we would get to the point where the primary voice that we were listening to was going to have to be wrestled. That was going to be taken away and changed. So I was always excited writing to that point.
Right, because the original book is written in third person. Is that right?
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. So in a production like this, that's firmly set first person from the point of view of Winston, it is a noticeable difference in the way the story is told, but it does lend itself well to an audio dramatization.
Yeah, and I think the narrator of 1984 in the novel is similar. You can align it to Winston's worldview. There's a sort of sardonic, paranoid, terrified, but actually surprisingly humorous sort of tone. So some of those thoughts and that voice was actually quite easy to move into Winston. It's more when it was explaining, there's so much world building in it. There's so much sort of arc of how we've got to this place.
Right,
That
that's what
it's
I
more
remember.
difficult. Yeah, and it's more difficult to make that very active in a dramatic way of Winston just telling us in long monologues what's happened to the the geopolitics and things like that. So it felt less exciting to me. So a lot of those things you might notice, are like displaced in news stories, or we get the proles are having conversations about being at the cinema and seeing a film of Eurasian people being shot at in a boat, and I sort of moved some of that world building, that sort of information around into people's voices around us. So
Yeah.
it just helps make it a bit more active.
So, Joe, I'm always curious about when things are adapted for TV, audio, doesn't matter really. How married people are to the idea of the construction, or, is this going to be a mini series? Is this going to be a one long listen? Are we going to cap it at, X amount of episodes? Did you have an idea of what the structure of the adaptation was going to be, or did that ebb and flow as you went through the writing process?
It started as a 3 hour. It was sort of pitched as a 3 hour, I guess, two sort of feature length parts of an hour and a half each. But actually, very early on, I got the sense that that it was useful to think about it a bit more episodically. That there are sort of three acts in the novel anyway, but yeah, it helped to break it down into units of sort of action, I guess. So I'd say in the sort of second draft, it became clear that it was going to be sort of 7-part, half hour or so, a bit more serialized, sort of. But I think it feels like a lot of people have absorbed it in one. Like a lot of people seem to listen to it in one sitting or a couple of sittings anyway.
Very easy to do that, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I think it just helps me. It helped me think about it in terms of like hooks at the end of each part, which are naturally in there anyway. You get the moment of like, you get the moment of the note being passed. You get the moment of I'm trying to think of all the hooks on the end of each episode now. O'Brien finally talking to Winston and inviting him to his flat. There are these moments that feel kind of hooky, that were useful to think about as a sort of end of unit of drama. So, and yeah, just I think there was a I guess the pitch was always to make it as engaging and accessible to a new audience as possible. So making it feel a little bit like a limited series, or a bingeable sort of series that could be sort of returnable and serialized, there was something that was very exciting about that from the get-go.
Well, I can testify that it's definitely a bingeable series, because I think of the 4 people that I know that listen to it, everybody listened to it in one shot, including myself. But it is unique because it's in this audio drama, dramatized adaptation, radio play, whatever you want to call it. But it's essentially an audiobook with a full cast and sound effects. Is there something you find uniquely distinctive about telling stories in this medium? Because it's still relatively niche.
Yeah, I grew up listening to to audio plays, and I always found it, the ones I really liked weren't audiobooks, were multiple characters with sound effects. Weirdly, I've just realised the first time I ever listened to one was in Canada, when my mum used to teach there, has loads of friends over there, and we were staying over there, and literally I think their sort of parenting tool was putting all the kids in one room to go to sleep and putting a tape on. And my mum was like, yeah, this is great, I'm taking this home with me. And I listened to these I'd listen to all these like BBC, there was like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and all those sort of classics that were
Cool.
like audio dramas, really, you know, audio comedies, but like had multiple voices, and I was so into them. I could see them all. So I think it's always been something that I've been into from a really young age. But the thing that I find really exciting about it is exactly that what I was talking about with there's a really intimate relationship with an audience without visuals that you just can't, you know, I can't achieve in any other media that I write in. But it still feels there's something literary about it. There's a lot that's based on imagination of the listener, but that it can be more influenced and you know, by music, by performance, by all of those, by sound effects. That it's actually a really visual medium, like to write in. I write with loads of description. I write with lots of like, they have to try, you know, they have to try and come up with sound effects to all the weird descriptions that I write that are very physical and visual. But it's amazing,
like
the gap.
like the rat contraption.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was one of my oh god, well, that was one of the hardest things to try and do in a non-clunky expositional way, because it's the most baffling batshit invention. This thing that's like a fencing mask with a box on. It's like a fencing mask with a cage with a door. That if I press this lever, I was like, do you want to make this more complicated for someone to imagine? Anyway, yeah, but there's
the way it was performed by Andrew Scott, it was so good because he was like proud of his invention. It said more about O'Brien the character as he was explaining it. It was brilliant.
Yeah, he does. He takes a lot of pride and joy in that invention. I think you're absolutely right. I think he was in some other room in the Ministry of Love, like, you know, looking over designs and saying, "Can we add it? Yeah, can we make it like a fencing mask?" But actually, it's a good point talking about Andrew Scott there, because particularly in Room 101, we had such an interesting experience recording everyone, but recording the two Andrews, Andrew squared. We had Andrew Garfield in first for a week, and then because of scheduling and other things, we had Andrew Scott come in afterwards. And you have another actor read in between those things, read in to the other person, read in for the other character.
Oh.
And the experience we did, yeah, just for those two, the experience of Andrew Garfield doing his Winston in Room 101 the first time was horrifying. We kept having to have breaks. Destiny, our director Destiny Carragher, is terrified of rats. So they were in a tiny booth, just those two, acting out this scene. A couple of takes, and it was traumatic. We had to kind of keep pausing, and I had to go in with sort of tea and biscuits and be like, "It's okay, we're not there."
Right.
And then the next week when we recorded with Andrew Scott, the perspective shifted entirely. We had so much fun being torturers. We were like, what else can we do? How else can we do this? And I was laughing so much at Andrew Scott at his performance of O'Brien, because it's sort of deliciously, bizarrely evil, you know, how he talks to Martin, his assistant, like they're an old couple on a cruise, but he's asking for like a syringe or him to turn up the electricity that he's torturing them with. But it's so interesting how quickly you can shift into perspective, into whose perspective you want to follow, and that's a really exciting thing about audio drama as well. And the sort of the intimacy that comes with it is, I really think it's easy to sort of pick up following people and be in people's bodies and, you know, in their skin in this media. So yeah, it's really exciting.
Well, your background is in theater. Is there a parallel between theater and dramatized adaptations like these?
There is, in terms of, I mean, I guess we see it in, there is a language of direct address, of like talking to an audience and making a relationship in TV and film. We see it in, I guess, like things like
Mm.
Fleabag, and there's been a few other things where it's like direct to camera, but it's such a sort of known device in theatre that maybe that sort of relationship of Winston talking to an audience, talking to another person, and saying, "Come on this journey with me," is sort of really well known. So I guess I have that access point, but again, it's a very visual medium, and theatre relies so much on what is unsaid, and the subtext of sort of pauses, I guess. And like all of my favorite writers are basically just pauses. Harold Pinter and Annie Baker. It's mostly the pauses that are the good bits. Um, Whereas you can't really afford to do it in audio. People just don't know what's going on. The I think the mistake or the difficult thing is when it goes the other way and people become too expositional in audio drama. There's that famous, I don't know who wrote it, Timothy West maybe wrote "This Gun in My Right Hand." It's like we can give too much to the audience sometimes, in description that they don't need. You can do so much with sound effects and performance, and just setting up a scene well enough, setting up props well enough. In an audio drama
Hmm.
to know the Paperweight is one in 1984 that's like quite a significant prop. There's not many, but that's one. The Diary is another, and you just have to know where to place it. You need to know that just it's in the room, and the way that they talk about it. Oh, I brought it back. I want it by my bed. So I know it's there. So when the thought police crash in, they can smash it. We know we've placed it. You seed things. Um, but all the rest of the visuals, otherwise, particularly moving between places, moving between Winston doing something and the thought police watching him in audience data, uh, is is actually a really simple move, and audiences, I think, get it straight away. You don't have to do any exposition of it at all. So you can be really visual. You don't have to explain it all. Yeah.
The sound effects do a lot of heavy lifting here, and sound effects are an understatement because it's a full soundscape. I said in our review that it's not a basic type of sound effect. It's like if somebody walks into a room, you don't just hear footsteps and a door opening. It's like you hear the entire atmosphere of the room, cars in the background, a ticking clock, and music. And when you go from like one room to another, it's very obvious. So even though you're not visually seeing that there's a change of setting, you can tell immediately. And that kind of leads me to my next question. What was it like hearing some of the most prominent scenes for the first time after they were all put together with the sound effects? For you as the writer, that must have been interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's an amazing experience to hear it come together, because it's recorded in abstract. Really, most of these things are recorded in their sort of singular parts, and um, you can imagine how the performances will move together. Will connect together. But yeah, hearing the world being built through Granny Eats Wolf were the producers with Audible, who just built this like incredible world of 1984. And you write down. I would write descriptions like we move through the walls of the ministry, and we see a huge factory floor where they're making there's a novel writing machine's broken, and then we move down into porno sec, where they're having a problem with their newest story, spanking stories. The ending's too predictable, and then we move into the records department where Winston works. Massive visual descriptions, but they found a way to make it not only sort of really clear, but really full and exciting, full of people, full of technology, and that compared with that with the paired with the music as well. Hearing it for the first time, the first thing I heard was the pre-credits scene, which is the hanging in the park by the kids' playground, and which was a scary scene to write because it was the first scene of the adaptation. It's a scene that's completely invented, though comes from the source material. They talk about hanging in the park that day, and the kids were really upset to miss out. But to sort of open an adaptation on it and make a bit of a statement that this is a new way of telling this story in certain ways, I was kind of intimidated by. But hearing it with that soundtrack and the sort of terrifying world of all these, these kids' voices, and they're all celebrating that there's this hanging going on a bit further ahead by the bandstand, and hearing Winston's internal voice as he's carrying this book home, just terrified of being found out, and he's watching a thought criminal like him being hanged. It's such huge stakes from the beginning. And I listened to it the first time through when Andrew Scott came in to record. They played it to him just to show him like a bit of a sense of the world. And I was like, I didn't want to show him how excited and amazed I was. I wanted to act as cool as possible. Like, yeah, this is every day.
You're like, no biggie, I do this all the time.
No biggie, this is everything I work on, sounds like this. And I was just sort of nodding suddenly, but inside I was going mad. And my heart was thumping, and it ends with this incredible sort of swell of the composition from Matt and Ilan, and it was amazing. It's better than I ever imagined it being, and I think it's a really thrilling way to tell this story.
You mentioned that you really like the moment of hate scene as well as that opening scene. Were there any other scenes, or is there one scene in particular that you really you have a special place in your heart for?
I mean, I will never forget the process of Room 101, of that in the space with both Andrews. I will never forget that as long as I live. And I couldn't look at either of them when they were performing as well. It was like looking at the face of God or something. They were so good. It was like pure talent. It was like that being Raiders of the Lost Ark. I was just like, this is going to burn my face off. And I sort of had to just focus, which was probably good because then it was, audio. I was just sort of looking down at my shoes, just listening to them. And yeah, that was an amazing scene. I loved. I did a bit of 2 Minutes Hate. I was one of the actors in that. I got to go in the booth and scream for 2 minutes at.
That must have been cathartic.
It was so good. It was like I totally get it. I totally get why they do it, and how like easy it was to just go and scream. And I was just making stuff up. I was just, you might hear me somewhere in there, but I have no idea if I made the cut. But I was just screaming, and it was amazing. So that was pretty good. My mum actually came in and recorded a background character in one of the parole quarters. She's like a fish. she's a fish seller, and she came in to record for about 2 minutes. And yet required so much from me in terms of like, she wanted to do some character work. She wanted to go in the side room and do some improv with me. And I was like, Mum.
She was so engaged.
She was so engaged. I was like, bless you, Mum. I just want you to shout fish for sale. And she wanted a 10-minute improv session with me. So I love the sort of parole scenes because I can hear her. But yeah, I mean, there's so many bits. I really like the scenes with Winston and Julia. I really like their first meeting in the woods. I just think it's kind of tender but massively exposing of Winston. He's so terrified of not only his body and being amorous with her, but also, him letting someone else in and stop trying to stop thinking for a moment and feel. I know I'm sort of guilty of that in this world, and I could really feel it with writing him there, that just really struggling to. So when he does, and they finally connect, it's kind of it's well, it's orgasmic. It's sort of an explosion of what happens when you kind of finally let someone in. So I loved that scene as well.
So this project has been available to anyone on Audible for almost 2 weeks now. So I'm sure you've heard a lot of feedback and read reviews. I don't know if you're the type of person that wants to read reviews of your own projects, but what kind of feedback have you been getting, and what's surprised you about the reception?
I have read some reviews. Yeah, I find it difficult not to. And anyone who says they don't is lying.
I don't blame you.
But yeah, I've seen mostly positive things. I think people. I think any sort of negativity has come from things we've left out, or not being as as full as the novel, which is, I wish it could be bigger and longer and fuller. But there's also a sort of there's a sweet spot with trying to make it really engaging to a new audience, and sort of make it succinct and tight and dynamic and all those sort of things. So that's been the main thing, I think, is some people have come to it, wanting it to be the exact same word for word as the novel, and maybe are surprised by this sort of dramatization rather than it being an audiobook. But a lot of people have been really, really positive and find it, exciting and a bit groundbreaking in terms of its use of music and sound design in particular, which I think is great, and I'm so excited, and I'm mostly pretty much thrilled about the reaction. It's been really strong, so we're really happy.
On a personal level, if you've come across negative reviews or things that people didn't like about this project, like how do you take that as an artist?
I mean, you have to just learn to know what people are talking about, and I mean that by, some people aren't angry about the piece of work, or the way in which it's been made. Some people are angry about other noise that goes with it. I found that some people have been, there's some stuff that you have to just sort of deflect and not even let enter in. There's an interesting thing with 1984 that a lot of the lexicon from it has been adopted by the alt-right, and it's really interesting that some of the anger has been from people that I can feel come from that way of thinking in terms of our casting decisions. It's you don't let that in. You just have to sort of focus on people who really engage with the work, and even if they don't respond to it, if they sort of sometimes there's real reason why somebody hasn't responded to work, or just didn't feel that this was the right way of doing something, and I'm always up for those conversations. So yeah, it's just about picking out what's sort of real response to the piece and what's something
right,
else.
And not all negative feedback is made the same. So sometimes what I'll see is that people are mad about what the book isn't instead of what it is.
Absolutely.
Right? They have issues with what the book isn't instead of what it actually is. Like, not what they wish it was. And it's okay, but like, it's just because that was an issue with your expectations going in. So it doesn't really reflect on you as an artist.
Yeah, that's a lot of it. That's a lot of it. I think that's a lot of where the gulf between expectation and the piece of work that you present. That's where a lot of the sort of negativity comes. But it's not. That's not necessarily anyone's fault either. That can be the way that something is promised to people, or marketed or packaged, or it's also the personal, the subjective relationship that someone has with a piece of work like this. I would, how you can't take that away from anyone. People, and particularly a novel like this, people have a really strong connection with. A lot of people did it at school. A lot of people have read it at formative times in their life and connected with certain themes that maybe I didn't in adapting. And you just have to, you have to take it and just go, yeah, okay, that's your opinion, and you can't make everybody happy. That's the thing, you've got to remember. But sometimes that's hard.
And the fact that it's been selling so well kind of tells you that I think a lot more people are enjoying it than disliking it. And everyone's entitled to their opinion too.
Absolutely, and there's been some positivity that I find questionable. Or not questionable, that I've just that's been like eye-opening. It's been eye-opening to me as an experience. There's been a bit. It's gone viral on TikTok because of there's a trend. There's a thing that some people like, which is I'm so British and coy. That is male whimpering, right? And the torture scene in Room 101 or pre-Room 101 with Andrew Scott just being cool and calm and Andrew Garfield whimpering has had a lot of hits. That's gone a bit crazy. And I think the New York Magazine wrote about it. There's been some pieces written about it going viral on TikTok. And, look, hey, I'm not shaming anyone for anything they like. That's all on them. That's cool. But that was not the original intention of writing that scene. I didn't write,
Are you sure?
Well, I'm going to do it.
You're a smart guy.
All I need
Are you sure?
I know now for next time, I'm just going to write whimpers all the way through a whole drama, basically. Whimpers sexily. It's been real. It's been a real learning curve. And I wouldn't say I warn people about Googling that, because I did. I'm just warning your listeners. It leads you down a rabbit hole.
Wow, that was unexpected.
Yeah,
but
there you go.
So what's next for you? Do you have any other audio dramas in the works? Like, what's your next project?
There's a few things cooking. But nothing tangible right now to scream about. I'm just going back into. I wrote a musical called The Little Big Things that just played in the West End for 6 months. Mm-hmm. It won an Olivier on Sunday, so that was pretty good. So we're just working out what happens with that next, and I'm writing a couple more musicals and a play. And I've got some TV stuff on the boil, but we'll see. You never know. I'd love to do. I mean, I'm really hopeful for the next audio piece. I'm really excited about it, but it's not quite there yet.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great fun.
Welcome back to AMI Audiobook Review. I'm Jacob Szymanski. Rems, after a couple of weeks after finishing this really awesome adaptation, I keep thinking about how difficult it is to produce something like this effectively, because I feel like it would be really hard for actors. Mm-hmm. The editing from an audio standpoint, it must be so time consuming, and there's also the aspect of adaptation, which is really not obvious, and that's why I'm more impressed with this project after having time to digest it all.
Yeah, I think that we learn a lot about the production as we listen, obviously, and we have our own perspectives of that because we consume audio adaptations pretty regularly. We do, and the community does. But then when we get to chat, break down the ins and outs of what production is, not just like the value for audio, but the ins and outs of coordinating, of getting people in studio, of riffing off of each other, like that chemistry, right? And the character building through theater. There's a lot that goes on, and a lot of decision making, but also just, I guess, investment in real time of like what you want something to sound like, theatrically.
There's so many decisions to make, and there's something almost tragic that I know for a fact that there are a lot of people out there that just can't buy into this type of production. Like Ryan Huey on the last episode, he said like, yeah, I can appreciate it for what it is. It's just not my thing. It's just weird. He'd rather just listen to the audiobook version, which fair enough. Like it's a very different type of medium. But I think the mindset is that if you're listening to like a full cast production like this, I think part of us just wants it to be like a good old fashioned TV show or a movie, which is something we're just so comfortable with.
Yeah, and I guess that depends also on what you were exposed to growing up. Like if you listen to a lot of, let's say OTR, right? Old time radio, or have listened to a lot of audio dramas growing up, that's one thing. But nowadays, there's still a lot of comparison between just like single narration audiobooks versus full cast audiobooks versus audio dramas. And there seem to be a lot of kind of opinions floating around, perspective, comparison, because we tend to put all of this stuff in the same camp nowadays.
There's another production that's a full cast production with sound effects. And the big difference is this 1984 one is only 3.5 hours. This one by Graphic Audio of The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson is close to 40 hours.
40
How
hours?
do you...
40 hours of full cast
of
audio drama?
Full cast. I'm dead serious.
That's a really long time.
Is that something you think you could handle, you would enjoy? Right. That's what I was thinking too. It kind of gets exhausting, right?
That's why I was asking Joe about, the structure of something like this, because digestibility, I think, plays a huge role when you're picking up something like this. Like, would you sit down for a 40-hour movie? No, probably not. Even if you know that you're not doing one sitting, it's still this kind of like understanding of when to break, right? How to break things off, how things are structured.
Well, we do binge a lot of TV shows.
Yeah, but you know that it's like 50
7
minutes an
seasons
episode.
of The Office.
Sure. But I'm taking in 22 minutes at a time. I'm taking in a season at a time. Like, it's not the same as taking in a 40-hour audiobook or something.
I think the way they organized 1984 is that they were like 6 episodes, and each episode finished with a hook, like leading into the next episode, which that was just good writing, good structure. And that made it a lot more digestible. If this was a solid chunk of 3.5 hours of audio, yeah, I would have been a little exhausted after a while.
Yeah, but it was one sitting for many of us.
To give you an idea of the Stormlight Archives, that's the series that The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson is from. It's still like a well-produced thing. It's just like significantly longer. And it is very, very popular. Here's a clip of it.
Dalinar, come here. Sadeas tells me he has won 3 gem hearts in the last few weeks alone.
He has indeed.
How many have you won?
Including the one today?
No, before this.
None, Your Majesty.
It's Sadeas's bridges. They're more efficient than yours.
I may not have won anything the last few weeks, but my army has won its share of skirmishes in the past. And the gem heart can go to damnation for all I care.
Perhaps. But what have you done lately?
I have been busy with other important things.
Sadeas raised an eyebrow.
More important than the war? More important than vengeance? Is that possible? Or are you just making excuses?
Dalinar gave the other High Prince a pointed look. Sadeas just shrugged. They were allies, but they were not friends. Not any longer.
If you're not aware, the Stormlight Archives is an epic fantasy with a lot of militaristic aspects, if you weren't able to glean from that sample.
Uh-huh.
Well, what did you think of that sample?
Well, yeah, I was wondering if you were going to comment on it first. Okay, I thought that was great. Definitely kind of lost track of, like, oh, I'm listening to something, pay attention. Like, it just got in the zone of it because it's so well produced. It's done really well. We know Graphic Audio has a good reputation for this kind of thing also. Do they separate this up into chapters, or do you know anything about that?
Oh, yeah, they're still chapterized.
Okay.
They still separate these things in like a good format. From what I understand, though, it is abridged in a sense where they'll remove dialogue tags, like instead of saying he said, she replied.
It would make no sense to do that
abashedly. You know, like they would just like act it out.
Yeah.
They'd use those as like acting cues instead. So it's not exactly abridged, but it is modified.
It is adapted. Yeah. I think we've talked about this before on the show as well. Like, when does it make sense to do that? When doesn't it? With a Sarah Fair. And to me, it makes, having not read the original book that this series is based on, or like this adaptation is based on, it sounds great the way it is. Now, obviously, I'm coming from like the bias of just having heard this first, but it's a drama, right? Like, it's dramatized. It's not just a straight read of something, or at least it doesn't feel like that. It feels much more embellished.
Yeah, it is an interpretation in a sense, right? Because there's still a lot of decisions to be made here, and how it's acted, and how the characters are portrayed. Like I know Sarius, he sounds like especially smarmy and hateable. I didn't exactly read him like that while I was reading the book in the regular audiobook.
Do you know if it's rewritten though, or like cleaned up, or if they took a lot of creative liberty to the actual writing, or if they just got rid of certain things?
I think it's pretty close. I think
Okay.
it's a very close adaptation from what I understand.
Yeah, so again, it's not taking a lot of writing credit, right? It's more about the production.
Yeah. And I thought it was interesting that they decided to make this series, Stormlight Archives, a dramatized adaptation of all things, because it's not every series that lends itself well to this type of adaptation. Like, one, it's a super long book, and two, it's part of a series, so there's kind of an expectation that they're going to do the entire series, which I think they've done. I know they've done the second, maybe the third. I don't think they've released the entire series yet. But also, like, there's a lot of characters, a lot of settings, big battles and set pieces, and a lot of magic. It's let's just say like an investigative drama, like a crime drama, where it's mostly just dialogue and people in offices and going to look at a crime scene in an alleyway would be a lot easier to produce than this kind of thing.
Do you think that it's when you get, I'm curious just about like how you consume, is it harder to get back into straight audiobook listening of fantasy specifically once you've had experiences like this that you enjoy?
Good question.
Because I think it kind of presents itself as the best of both worlds. Like, it's fantasy, but it's not a visual representation. But there's enough to go off of with the audio production that you're kind of immersed, right?
To be honest, I did listen to a good chunk of this graphic audio adaptation, but I went back to the regular audiobook.
Really?
Because I found it a bit slow. And I think a part of it was that I wasn't thrilled with the book in general. And that had nothing to do with the adaptation. Like, I thought the book was mid at best.
But you went back to the book.
Yeah, I went back to the audiobook because I needed a change. You know, it's kind of like how a lot of people say if they're struggling through a series, they'll like flip-flop between print and audiobook. It was the same principle.
Well, that's interesting. It was a good comparison to the 1984. Thanks.
Yeah, I wanted to bring it up because there's quite a few of these coming out now. And it's kind of funny when people buy an audiobook and then they're surprised that it's a full cast production. And they're like, oh, this is not what I was expecting. It's kind of goofy.
Right.
And some people are caught off guard in a bad way. They're just like,
yeah,
this is not what I'm used to. This is not what I wanted. So it depends how they call it. Sometimes they will literally just say adaptation, like in parentheses. But not everybody knows what exactly that means. It doesn't say full cast production. It's like I think the wording behind what these things actually are can be kind of unclear sometimes.
Yeah, and our expectations of what they mean as well.
Yeah, exactly. Anyways, Rams, we're pretty much out of time, but next week we're finally going to get to the question to the book club that we posed a while ago. What's the last book that made you cry, and what was it about the specific passage that did it for you? We already have a couple good answers to this one. And we're also going to get to talk to Amir Khan. I don't know what he has for us yet, but he always has
It'll be
stuff
good
for us. If you have any feedback or questions, or you want to talk to us about anything, you can call us at 1-866-509-4545, or you can leave us an email at feedback@ami.ca. I'm Jacob Szymanski with Rami Amuthan. You were listening to AMI Audiobook Review. Thanks for listening.